Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Chris. This is how did Russia become an empire. I'm going to go to here. Be about 16 minutes. I'll knock out two parts. This is part see, I think 1 and 2 I did together, 3 by itself, 4, and then I did 5. So this is going to be 6 and 7. So, not a whole lot of talking needed. On with the video.
1702, the main Russian army, under the command of Peter himself, made preparations at the settlement of Ladoga to assault the Swedish fort of Notbori. Before he would begin the siege, the Tsar wanted to ensure that his army would not be vulnerable to a Swedish surprise attack. With Schlippenbach's army no longer a factor, the only two remaining threats in the area were a 5,000-strong army at Nyenskans, led by Kroniot, and the Swedish Ladoga flotilla. With Kroniot unwilling to leave the safety of his fort, and with the destruction of the Ladoga flotilla in late August, Peter was now free to advance on Notbori. The Russian army arrived near Notbori on the 27th or 28th of September 1702. Although the fort of Notbori was in essence a medieval fort, with high walls and towers, it had an excellent defensive position. It was placed on the mouth of the Neva River into Lake Ladoga. In addition, the fort also encompassed almost the entirety of the island, rendering any amphibious assault nearly impossible. Although sources offer diverging details, the size of the Russian army was estimated to have been between 20,000 and 30,000 men, together with 50 artillery pieces. The Swedish garrison was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Gustav Wilhelm von Schlippenbach, uncle of the aforementioned General Schlippenbach. It numbered around 225 men, with 124 guns, most of which were small. On the first days of the siege, Swedish boats freely sailed up the Neva and brought reinforcements and provisions to the garrison. The Swedish defenders now numbered around 250. Peter considered the constant reinforcements a threat to his Ingrian campaign, so he sent 50 gunboats to the Neva River to put a stop to Swedish river operations. The defenders fired their artillery at the boats, however it was ineffective and the Russians suffered no losses. At the beginning of October, Kroniot sent 500 of his own men to Notbori. In the end, only 50 managed to reach the fort due to Russian attacks. As the Russians had lost all of their artillery at the Battle of Narva 2 years prior, they made an extraordinary effort to replace their lost and outdated artillery pieces, even going as far as to melt down church bells for the material. The new Russian artillery corps was quite effective. The artillery barrages were strong, with the fort's walls and towers beginning to crumble after several days of intense fire. With only a few of the Swedish cannons actually able to reach the Russian army, Russian losses were low. By the 7th of October, the Russian army started preparing for an assault, and on the 9th, ladders were given to the volunteers. The first few minor assaults were easily repulsed by the Swedes, though their aim was most likely to just test the Swedish defences. On the 11th, a large firebomb was shot into the fort, and the mass assault began. With the walls breached in 3 places, the garrison was stretched thin. The first storming was attempted at 4 AM. However, by 6 o'clock it was stopped due to mounting losses and a stubborn Swedish defence. The second assault also failed, while the third one technically succeeded, as the Swedes were left with only a handful of men. That evening, the Swedish commander surrendered the fort and gave Peter the key to the city, which symbolized that Notbori was the key to the Neva River. Peter recognized
Now I can't really tell, but is that how it looks today? Is it around today? Curious.
Recognizing that as well, renamed the city to Schlüsselburg and placed it under the command of his most trusted general, Menshikov. The siege, though relatively short, left the Russian army exhausted, and the Tsar's desire to repair and improve the fort gave them some time to recover. Charles was aware of the situation in the north, however he did not see the Russian advances as a significant threat, and continued pursuing his goals in Poland. As the campaigning season of 1703 began, the Russian army left Schlüsselburg and advanced towards the mouth of the river Neva. The mouth of the river was guarded by a fort called Nienkens. Hearing that the Russian army was approaching, the Swedish garrison burned the fort to the ground. Peter the Great captured what was left of Nienkens on the 1st of May, and on the 27th
Why didn't they want to fight?
decided to found a new city there, Russia's future capital, St. Petersburg. In order to build the superior city and the fortresses around it, tens of thousands of serfs were forcefully brought to St. Petersburg. Along with them, Peter also invited many architects, engineers and shipwrights from Western Europe to help him build the city of his dreams.
I didn't realize St. Petersburg was an island, but you know, the hell do I know?
These extraordinary efforts seem to have paid off, as by 1704 St. Petersburg began sprawling outwards from the main fortress, and two new fortresses were built alongside it. There were several Swedish attempts at reconquering the city in the next few years, however all of them were unsuccessful. Back in Poland,
So I'm an idiot because St. Petersburg, Peter the First. Wonder where he came up with the name. It just hit me. I'm tired. I'm sorry.
Charles managed to obtain the support of enough of the Polish nobility to have Stanisław Leszczyński crowned as the new king. On the other hand, Augustus still mounted a significant resistance.
Sorry. That guy was the Vivadi. I'm mumble reading because a lot of this I probably can't pronounce and I would just butcher it. Election to the Polish throne. He supported Sapie's Lithuanian Civil War. It was favored to take the Polish throne after the king decided to dethrone Augustus. Okay.
As he controlled the majority of the Polish army. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth subsequently descended into chaos as the Sandomierz Confederation, led by Augustus, and the Warsaw Confederation, led by Stanisław, began fighting a brutal civil war. Due to the chaotic nature of the conflict, forts and cities continuously changed hands between the two confederations and Sweden, and it's difficult to discern who controlled several parts of the Commonwealth at different points in time. With most of Ingria secure, and any larger Swedish armies in the Baltic neutralized, in the spring of 1704, Tsar Peter turned towards the last two Swedish strongholds in the area, Narva and Dorpat. In April, the commander at Narva, Henning Rudolf Horn, asked the Swedish government for more men and supplies, as Russian soldiers were gathering on the other side of the river. He had also asked the navy to attack Nienszans to relieve some of the pressure on Narva. It is unlikely that he received any significant aid, and by late April, the few Swedish ships that were present at the mouth of the Narva River were dislodged by Russian artillery. In early May, Russian troops started crossing the river and raiding the countryside outside Narva and Ivangorod. Narva was already suffering from supply shortages due to the large garrison and refugees, and these raids only worsened the situation. With all those people living in unsanitary conditions, disease soon broke out too. At Nienszans, Peter prepared two armies, one for Ingria and another for Karelia. After receiving a letter from General Apraxin that Schlippenbach was planning to take his entire army to Narva, Peter decided to send the entire force there. By late May, the Russians had complete control of the river and the surrounding areas, in effect meaning that Narva was cut off from the rest of Sweden. Schlippenbach's army was too weak to be of any use there, and the other stronghold of Dorpat was under siege too. Narva had been left to its fate. Horn had about 5,000 men under his command, with over 400 artillery pieces. The Russian army consisted of 20,000 men and 99 guns. Horn ordered several sallies in the beginning of June, which were very successful. In one of those sallies, a Russian camp near Avangarod was looted, and much-needed supplies were brought back to the city. Peter was aware that the garrison was expecting some reinforcements from Revel, so he staged a surprise attack on the 8th of June. The Tsar had some of his men don blue uniforms and hold Swedish banners. Then they staged a mock battle with some Russian troops on the road from Revel. Horn sent a detachment to their aid, falling right into the trap. Those troops were immediately ambushed, and they lost over 50 men, including a senior officer.
Wow.
On the 18th, the Russians started to dig in, and by the 25th, the entire army was present for the siege. The Russian troops regularly threw hand grenades over the city walls, and they also frequently unleashed musket volleys at the defenders.
What would hand grenades be back in those days? I'm just curious.
The defenders were further demoralized when they learned that Boris Sheremetev had taken Dorpat on the 24th of June. By the beginning of July, the supply situation in Narva had become critical. Horn confiscated food from the burghers and the nobles for the army. This meant that the poor in the city were starving, while the rich suffered from food shortages. Over the course of the month, Russian trenches became increasingly close to the walls of Narva, and their hand grenades and musket volleys started actually claiming victims. The defenders regularly fired at the Russian army and even carried out a few sallies, however none of these were effective. In an effort to relieve Narva, a small Swedish army attacked Nienschatz. Unfortunately for the Swedes, they were easily repelled. The Russians had built several bridges over the river in the last month, ensuring that reinforcements and supplies would regularly arrive to their own troops. With the reinforcements, Peter now had over 40,000 men besieging the city. On the 30th or 31st, after Sunday's service, the Russian artillery corps started heavily bombarding Narva. One of the shots hit the gunpowder and chemical warehouse, leading to a massive explosion and fire in the city. With morale...
This is going to be a stupid question. Do they aim for those, or is that just a lucky shot? Because I would figure you'd aim for them if you knew where they were. So I'm going to say it was a lucky shot, especially if they've never been in the fort. Guessing.
Being at an abysmal level, soldiers and civilians alike started surrendering and defecting to the Russian side at the beginning of August. The Russian siege leader, Ogilvy, offered lenient terms in return for surrender. Horn, however, asked for a ceasefire instead, and the Russian War Council subsequently decided to storm the city. On the 10th, the signal was given for the assault to start. Regular Russian soldiers started concentrating on the breaches in the walls, while the elite Preobrazhensky regiment climbed the walls of the bastions. Due to precise artillery fire, the Swedish artillery was rendered useless during the assault. The Swedish soldiers defended the breaches bravely, though they were forced to retreat due to concentrated musket fire. As the Russians started streaming through the breaches, Horn had a mine detonated there. This did not stop the attackers for long, as they soon started entering the city en masse. Horn retreated with a handful of men to the walls of the old city, where he was surprised to see that the only soldiers approaching were Russian ones. Left without a choice, Horn surrendered in exchange for mercy towards the city's inhabitants. In spite of the promise given to Horn, brutal looting, rape and pillaging ensued.
Stop the violence and RP stabbed one of us. Jesus! He showed off his bloody sword and said, "Behold, this blood is not Swedish but Russian. I stabbed my own to death to contain the fury to which you had driven my soldiers." According to some sources, he also punched Horn in the face and even had Horn's dead wife out of his burial and the corpse thrown into the river. According to some sources, he also punched Horn in the face and even had Horn's dead wife out of his burial. Removed her from her. Wow. I mean, you know, I understand having to stab your own person. Punch the guy in the face, okay. But to desecrate his wife, you know, I can't get behind that. Especially after you just punch the guy in the face.
1,800 members of the garrison were imprisoned, while the rest were killed during the battle. On the other hand, the number of civilian casualties are thought to be huge, though the exact number is unknown. The Russians lost around 3,000 men. It was at Narva that Peter signed a treaty with Augustus, granting the Saxon monarch significant subsidies, 12,000 Russian soldiers, and lands in Ruthenia in exchange for staying in the war. Over the next year, the Russians and Saxons had devised a strategy to defeat the Swedish army and expel Charles from Poland. The Grodno campaign, as it later became known, aimed to capture the Swedish forces in a pincer movement, with a three-sided offensive from Lithuania, Ruthenia and Saxony.
This is a letter written by Gene Roddenberry, sent to Star Trek fans in 1980. The essence
Are you
of
serious?
the Star Trek...
Oh my goodness. I don't care.
Charles was not sitting idly either, and by the summer of 1705, he had convinced the Diet in Warsaw to start working on a peace treaty and to crown Stanisław as king. As what was going on in Warsaw was seen as a possible catastrophe for Augustus's war effort, not to mention the fact that it represented a significant hit to his pride, he knew that he had to act quickly. A large Saxon cavalry force was sent to assault Warsaw and to stop the coronation of Stanisław. Augustus's reckless endeavour ended in a complete disaster, as the force was defeated by a much smaller Swedish army and its commander was captured. Furthermore, the Saxon commander also divulged the strategic intentions of Augustus and his allies, allowing the Swedes to thoroughly prepare for the upcoming Grodno campaign. As the majority of Livonia and Estonia were under Russian control by the beginning of the campaign, the main Russian army, along with large Saxon and Polish-Lithuanian contingents, set up for winter quarters at the fort of Grodno in Ruthenia. They expected a quick victory over the Swedish army after the campaigning season of 1706 began. However, they did not even get the chance to try. Much like his predecessor, Gustavus Adolphus, Charles' force marched his army in the dead of winter and arrived at Grodno on the 24th of January. Lacking the artillery to assault the fort, Charles opted to cross the frozen Neman River and blockade the city. Seeing that the young king was preparing to encircle them, Augustus immediately left with 5,000 men, hoping to reinforce his army in Saxony. Peter, unwilling to bring the rest of his army to relieve the siege, ordered Menshikov to leave the fort with the cavalry as soon as possible. Grodno fell in April, and the Russians lost more than a third of their initial force. They would have lost even more had Charles not misjudged the direction of Menshikov's retreat. Unable to pursue the Russian army through the thick marshlands of Polessia, Charles went westwards to seek a battle with the Saxons. As Charles was busy with the siege, Augustus had prepared to advance towards Warsaw. He led a 7,000-strong cavalry force, while the main body of the Saxon-Polish army was commanded by Schulenberg. A third Saxon army under Brauser was also advancing from Krakow. Schulenberg crossed the Oder on the 8th of February and advanced towards the town of Sława in Silesia. While this was taking place, Reinschild was resting in his winter quarters, which extended from Kostin to the border with Brandenburg.
Alright. Big battle is about to happen, and I am going to stop it here, because I am tired. But anyways, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I think this is 6 and 7. It doesn't matter. If you're watching this now and you're, oh, it's already going to tell you what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. Like and subscribe, or this battle won't take place. It is what it is. Have a good day. Have a good night.